Vanessa's spit landed directly on my plate of chicken and dumplings with a wet thud that still haunts me. Her words, "Just eat it, you old coot. Soon you'll be in a home, and you won't even have this," hit me like poisoned darts. But what came after that was going to haunt her for a long, long time, because that woman had no idea who she was messing with. It was Sunday, the one day I considered sacred for family. I'd been up since 6 in the morning preparing that meal with all the love my 67 years could muster. The aroma of simmering onions and celery filled the house. The golden brown potatoes rested on the porcelain platter I'd inherited from my mother, and I had set the table with the pink tablecloth I'd cross-stitched when I still believed my efforts were appreciated. My 8-year-old grandson, Pablo, froze with his fork in midair, his wide eyes darting between his mother and me as if he were watching the apocalypse unfold. Isaiah, my only son, the same one I carried for 9 months and raised alone after his father left us, looked down at his plate and kept chewing as if nothing had happened, as if his own mother didn't deserve a word in her defense. Vanessa sat up straighter in her chair with that cruel smile she had perfected during the 5 years she'd lived in my house. Yes, my house, because even though she strutted around like she owned the place, this property was still mine. The violet dress I'd put on, especially for the occasion, now felt like a ridiculous costume. I'd styled my hair, put a little rouge on my cheeks, and chosen my small pearl earrings, all to feel dignified at my own table. "Didn't you hear me, Margarita?" Vanessa's voice sliced through the air like a saw. "Eat that slop. It's what they'll serve you at the home you're headed for." Her laugh sounded like breaking glass, and I felt something inside my chest break too. I looked at the plate in front of me. The chicken I had seasoned so carefully, the potatoes I had peeled one by one thinking of Pablo's enjoyment, the tomato salad I had sliced into perfect rounds, all of it tainted by the contempt of this woman who had invaded my home and turned it into a silent hell. For 5 years I had endured her venomous comments, her sneering looks, the way she treated me like a maid in my own house. I had tolerated her telling me to clean the bathroom when guests were over, forbidding me to use the living room phone, and making me feel like an intruder in the place where I had raised my son. But that spit was the final straw. As I watched her saliva slide down my food, something inside me snapped for good. It wasn't just the humiliation of the moment. It was the accumulation of 1,000 tiny cruelties, 1,000 silent contempts, 1,000 times my son had chosen to stay quiet rather than defend me. Tears started to sting my eyes, but I swallowed them back, just as I had learned to swallow everything else in this house. Vanessa kept talking, her voice growing sharper and more cruel with each word. "Look at how pathetically you're looking at us, as if we're to blame for you being a burden. Pablo, tell your grandmother it's time she understood her place here." My grandson, that little angel with the big eyes who used to hug me and ask for stories before bed, lowered his head and mumbled something inaudible. Vanessa had managed to make even him afraid of me, to see me as something to be ashamed of rather than the grandmother who adored him. Isaiah finally looked up from his plate, but not to defend me. "Mom, maybe Vanessa is right. Maybe it would be better if—" His words trailed off, but I understood perfectly. My own son, the person I had sacrificed my youth for, was considering sending me to a nursing home to please his wife. The wall clock read 2:30 in the afternoon when I made a decision that would change everything forever. I rose from my chair with a calm I didn't understand myself. My legs trembled, but something inside me had hardened like steel. I picked up the contaminated plate with steady hands and, without saying a word, walked toward the kitchen. Vanessa watched me, expecting to see me broken, humiliated, and defeated as always. But this time was different. This time, instead of washing her plate as I had done 1,000 times before, I held it over my head and smashed it against the kitchen floor with all the strength my 67-year-old arms had. The sound of the porcelain exploding echoed through the house like a war cry. "What are you doing, you crazy old lady?" Vanessa appeared at the kitchen door with wide eyes, as if she had just seen a ghost rise from its grave. Isaiah came up behind her, wearing that panicked look he got when things spun out of his control. I just stood there, surrounded by pieces of broken china, breathing as if I had just run a marathon. My hands were shaking, but for the first time in 5 years, it wasn't from fear. It was from a rage so pure, it gave me a strength I didn't know I had. "What I should have done a long time ago," I replied, in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. It was lower, firmer, loaded with an authority I had forgotten I possessed. "I'm breaking everything you've contaminated with your presence in my house." Vanessa took a step closer, her face red with fury. "You are completely insane, Isaiah. Look at what your mother did. She's losing her mind." She pointed at the pieces of porcelain as if they were evidence of my insanity. But I saw something completely different. I saw the fragments of my dignity that had finally decided to fight back. My son approached me with his hands out, as if I were a wild animal that might attack at any moment. "Mom, please calm down. Let's talk. Let's solve this like civilized people." His voice trembled, and for a moment I saw the scared little boy who used to hide behind my skirts during thunderstorms. But it was too late for soft words, too late for empty fixes and apologies. "Civilized?" I laughed, and my laugh sounded bitter, like cold coffee. "You talk about being civilized after your wife spit in my food as if I were a dog? After 5 years of treating me like a servant in the house that my sweat and tears paid for?" Pablo timidly appeared at the door, his eyes filled with tears. My heart broke to see him like that, but I knew this had to happen. He had to see his grandmother stand up for herself, even if it was for the last time. "Grandma Margarita, are you okay?" His small, shaky voice almost made me falter. It almost made me go back to being the submissive old lady who cleaned in silence and endured everything with a forced smile. But no, not this time. I knelt and stroked his cheek with infinite tenderness. "I'm okay, my love. For the first time in a long time, I'm perfectly okay." I kissed his forehead and stood up to face the adults who had turned my home into a battlefield. Vanessa had regained her composure and now looked at me with that venomous smile I knew so well. "Perfect. Now everyone can see what you really are. A hysterical, violent old woman. Isaiah, I hope you understand now why we can't keep living with her. She's dangerous." The words hit me like slaps, but this time they didn't break me. This time they just made me stand taller. "Dangerous," I repeated, savoring the word. "You're right, Vanessa. I am very dangerous. Dangerous to your plan to turn my son into your puppet. Dangerous to your comfort of living for free in a house that doesn't belong to you. Dangerous to your fantasy of being the queen of a castle you didn't build." Isaiah stepped between us, but his gesture was 5 years too late. "Mom, please don't make this any harder than it already is. Vanessa is my wife. She's Pablo's mother. We have to find a solution that works for everyone." "A solution that works for everyone?" My voice rose an octave. "You mean a solution like sending me to a home so your wife can redecorate my house to her liking? That kind of solution?" The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Vanessa and Isaiah exchanged a look that said everything. They had already talked about this. They had already planned my destiny as if I were an old piece of furniture to be discarded. In that moment, I understood that the humiliation at lunch hadn't been a spontaneous outburst. It had been calculated, designed to provoke this exact reaction. They wanted me to lose my temper, to seem unstable, to give them an excuse to do what they had already decided. But two could play that game. I walked toward my room with firm steps, stepping on pieces of porcelain that crunched under my shoes like broken bones. I heard them whispering behind me, probably planning their next move, probably calling someplace to confirm my reservation for the hell they had prepared for me. I opened my closet and took out the suitcase I hadn't used since my husband's death 15 years ago. It was brown leather with worn corners and an old airport tag still stuck to one side. I placed it on the bed and started packing my clothes, my few books, the photos of Pablo when he was a baby. I could hear them arguing in the living room, their voices rising and falling like angry waves. Vanessa was clearly annoyed that things hadn't gone as she expected. And Isaiah sounded like a man trying to put out a fire with a cup of water. As I folded my violet dress, the one I had put on with so much hope that morning, a tear fell on the fabric. But it wasn't a tear of defeat. It was a tear of liberation, like the ones you cry when a very sad movie finally ends and you can walk out of the theater into the daylight. I finished packing in 15 minutes. 15 minutes to summarize 67 years of life into a brown suitcase that had seen better days. As I zipped it up, I could hear the argument in the living room intensifying. Vanessa was yelling something about senile dementia and legal responsibilities, while Isaiah repeated like a broken record that everything could be fixed if I apologized and promised to behave. Behave, as if I were a naughty child instead of the woman who had given birth to, raised, and supported the man who was now asking me to behave. I grabbed the suitcase and left my room. The hallway had never seemed so long. Each step on the burgundy carpet, which I had chosen myself 20 years ago, sounded like a drum beating the rhythm of my departure. When I reached the living room, the three of them looked at me as if a Martian had appeared in the middle of their family gathering. "Where do you think you're going?" Vanessa crossed her arms, partially blocking the front door. Her posture screamed authority, as if this were her house and I were a problematic tenant who refused to pay rent. "I'm leaving my own house before you kick me out of my own house," I replied, my voice calmer than I felt inside. The difference is subtle, but important. Isaiah approached with that expression he wore when he wanted to convince me of something. The same face he'd made at 12 when he broke my grandmother's crystal vase and tried to convince me it was the cat. "Mom, you don't have to leave. We can talk. We can solve this like adults." "Vanessa didn't mean to..." "Didn't mean to what?" I interrupted him. "Didn't mean to call me a useless old coot? Didn't mean to spit in my food? Didn't mean to humiliate me in front of my grandson?" My voice rose with each question, and I saw Pablo shrink behind the sofa like a frightened animal. I walked over to my grandson and knelt in front of him, ignoring the protest from my knees. I took his small hands in mine and looked him straight in the eyes. "Pablo, my love, I want you to know that your grandmother loves you more than anything in this world, and that none of what's happening here is your fault, okay?" He nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Are you leaving forever, Grandma?" The question pierced me like a spear, but I held my composure. "I don't know, honey, but I want you to remember that people who truly love us never spit in our food or call us ugly names. Do you understand?" Pablo nodded again and hugged me with that desperate strength of children who feel the world crumbling around them. Vanessa cleared her throat loudly, as if our tender moment was bothering her. "Enough with the drama," she said in the voice she used to address Pablo when he had done something wrong. "Margarita, if you're really going to leave, at least have the decency to leave the house keys." I rose slowly, feeling every one of my 67 years weighing on my bones. I looked her directly in the eye, those small, hard eyes that had never shown an ounce of genuine affection for me. "The keys to my house are staying with me," I said with a calm I didn't feel. "This property is in my name, paid for with the sweat of my brow and the overtime I worked at the factory for 20 years while I raised that son of yours alone." The silence that followed was so thick you could have swum through it. Vanessa's mouth hung open like a fish out of water. She clearly hadn't expected that answer. Isaiah looked like he'd been slapped. And Pablo looked at all of us with the innocent confusion of someone who doesn't understand why adults behave worse than children. "But Mom," Isaiah stammered, "we've been paying the utilities. We've put money into repairs." I laughed, and my laugh sounded like breaking glass. "Paying utilities? With what money, Isaiah? With the money you make at that part-time job you got 6 months ago? Or with the money your wife makes selling makeup to the neighbors?" Vanessa's face turned bright red. She clearly didn't like her true income being mentioned, which barely reached $200 a month on her best days. "You've been living off my retirement check," I continued, feeling as if every word I spoke returned a bit of my lost power. "My $450 a month check that you've been spending like it was your own, while I had to ask permission to buy a new shampoo." Isaiah ran his hands through his hair, that nervous gesture he'd made since he was a boy, when he knew he'd done something wrong but didn't want to admit it. "Mom, you know the economy is tough. You know we're doing the best we can." "The best you can?" My voice cracked slightly, not from sadness, but from a rage so deep it surprised even me. "The best you can includes letting me eat the scraps while you serve yourselves the big portions. It includes making me sleep in the smallest room in my own house. It includes letting your wife treat me like her personal maid." Vanessa finally found her voice. "Don't exaggerate. We've always been fair to you. We give you a roof over your head, food. You give me?" I exploded like a pressure cooker that had been building steam for years. "You give me a roof over my head in my own house. You give me food bought with my own money. You, who came here with one suitcase and 2 dresses, you give me anything?" Pablo started to cry openly, and it broke my heart, but I couldn't stop. The words poured out of me like lava from a volcano that had been dormant for too long. "For 5 years, I've been a servant in my own house. I've cleaned your messes, cooked your favorite meals, and watched Pablo while you went out to have fun, and all in exchange for being treated like an annoyance, as if my existence was a burden you had to tolerate." I walked toward the front door, dragging my suitcase across the tiles I had scrubbed on my hands and knees hundreds of times. Vanessa stepped aside, but her face showed a mixture of fury and something that looked surprisingly like fear. "And what are you going to do now?" she asked, in a voice that tried to sound defiant but trembled at the edges. "Where are you going to go? You have no one else, Margarita. We're your only family." I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. For a second, her words echoed in my mind like a terrible prophecy. It was true that I didn't have many options, that my savings were practically non-existent, that most of my friends had either died or were in nursing homes. But then I remembered the spit on my plate, and the strength returned to my legs. "I'd rather be alone than in bad company," I replied without turning around. "And you are not my family. A family doesn't spit in your food. A family doesn't humiliate you. A family doesn't plan to send you to a home to take your stuff." I opened the door, and the cool evening air hit my face like a blessing. For the first time in 5 years, I breathed without feeling like I was suffocating. The street had never seemed so wide or so quiet. It was 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, and the neighborhood was resting in that heavy calm that comes after a family meal. I dragged my suitcase along the concrete sidewalk, feeling how each spinning wheel took me farther away from the nightmare my life had been for the last 5 years. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have enough money for a decent motel, and I didn't have any family who would welcome me with open arms. All I had was my newly reclaimed dignity and a suitcase full of memories that hurt less than staying. My legs started to tremble after 3 blocks. The adrenaline that had sustained me during the confrontation began to fade, and the reality of my situation fell over me like a cold rain. I sat down on a park bench where I used to bring Pablo when he was little, where he would run around the swings while I knitted and dreamed of being the favorite grandmother who was always there. I took my phone out of my purse, that old device Vanessa always criticized for wasting battery unnecessarily. The screen showed 3 missed calls from Isaiah, but I wasn't ready to hear his empty apologies or his promises that everything would change. Instead, I dialed the number I had saved under Lydia Work. Lydia had been my co-worker at the textile factory for 15 years until we both retired. We had lost touch when I moved in with Isaiah, but I remembered she had always told me her door was open if I ever needed her. "Margarita?" Her voice sounded surprised but warm. "What a surprise to hear from you. How are you, dear?" The words caught in my throat. How could I explain that I was sitting on a park bench with a suitcase, homeless, without family, with nothing but my bruised pride and a pension that barely covered my expenses? "Lydia," I finally managed to say, "do you remember you always told me if I ever needed anything?" "Of course I remember. What do you need? Are you okay? You sound funny." I broke down. All the tears I had been holding back during the confrontation came out at once, like a dam finally giving in to pressure. I told her everything through sobs, the spit, the daily humiliations, the talk about the nursing home, my explosion in the kitchen, the suitcase that now rested at my feet as evidence of my failure as a mother and a grandmother. Lydia listened without interrupting, making those sounds of understanding that only women who have lived a lot know how to make. When I finished my story, there was a brief silence before her voice, now firm and decisive, filled the earpiece. Margarita, listen to me. You get a taxi right now and you come to my house. I have a spare room and a full kettle. We can talk about everything else tomorrow. Lydia, I can't afford to pay you rent. My pension barely covers. Who asked for rent? We're old friends, not a landlady and a tenant. Besides, my house is too big for one person. You'd be doing me a favor by keeping me company. I hung up with a mix of relief and gratitude that made me cry again. But these tears were different. They were tears of hope, of knowing that there were still people in the world who understood the meaning of solidarity between women who had worked hard their whole lives. The taxi arrived in 15 minutes. The driver, an older gentleman with a gray mustache, helped me with the suitcase without asking questions about why a woman my age was traveling alone on a Sunday afternoon with a tear-stained face. During the ride to Lydia's house, my phone didn't stop ringing. Isaiah. Isaiah. On the 5th call, I decided to answer. Mom, thank God, where are you? Vanessa is very worried. She says maybe we were too hasty, that we can talk. Vanessa is worried? I laughed bitterly. The same Vanessa who spit in my food is worried about me. What an interesting change of heart. Mom, please come back home. Pablo won't stop crying. He's asking for you. We can fix this. We can set some rules so everyone is comfortable. Rules? The taxi took a turn, and I held on to my seat. What kind of rules, Isaiah? Rules like I can't use my own kitchen after 8 at night? Like I can't invite friends over without asking permission? Like I have to be grateful for a plate of food in my own house? That's not it, Mom. You know it's not. It's not? My voice rose. Isaiah, for 5 years I have lived like a stranger in my own home. I've asked permission for everything. I've endured insults. I've cleaned up messes I didn't make. I've watched your son while you and your wife went out to have fun, and all in exchange for being treated like a burden. The silence on the other end of the phone was eloquent. Isaiah knew everything I was saying was true, but admitting it would mean admitting he had failed as a son, and that was something his ego was not willing to accept. Where are you? He finally asked. At least tell me where you are so I know you're safe. I'm fine, I replied, and for the first time in a long time, it was true. I'm better than fine. I'm free. I hung up and silenced the phone. Outside, the city passed by like a blurry movie, and I allowed myself to imagine what my life would be like without having to tiptoe around in my own house, without having to endure contemptuous looks at breakfast, without having to listen to venomous comments about my age, my clothes, my habits. The taxi stopped in front of a small, well-kept house with a garden full of red flowers and a white-painted iron gate. Before I could ring the bell, the door opened and Lydia appeared, grayer than the last time I'd seen her, but with the same warm smile I remembered from our factory days. Margarita, dear, she hugged me as if it hadn't been 5 years since we last saw each other. Welcome home. Those words, welcome home, sounded like heavenly music. It had been so long since I felt welcome anywhere that I had forgotten what it felt like to be received with genuine love. Lydia helped me with my suitcase and guided me inside. The house smelled of cinnamon and coffee, scents that reminded me of my childhood, when my mother baked cookies on Sundays, and the house was filled with laughter instead of tension. Sit down, I'll make you some, Lydia said, pointing to a comfortable-looking beige armchair. And I want you to tell me everything from the beginning. We have all night and tomorrow, too. For the first time in 5 years, I sat on a piece of furniture without worrying if it was allowed, without calculating if my presence would bother anyone, without fearing they would tell me to move because someone else wanted to use that spot. I sank into the armchair and closed my eyes. The silence in Lydia's house wasn't the tense, hostile silence of Isaiah's house. It was a peaceful silence, full of possibilities, full of the promise that maybe, just maybe, the best days of my life were yet to come. That first night at Lydia's, I slept better than I had in 5 years. There were no stealthy footsteps in the hallway, no whispers of conspiracy in the next room, no constant feeling of walking on eggshells. I woke up at 7 in the morning to the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the house like a morning hug. Lydia was already awake, sitting in her small yellow kitchen, reading the newspaper with a pair of glasses that kept sliding down her nose. When she saw me appear at the door, she smiled, as if my presence were the best gift she had received in a long time. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty. How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," I answered honestly, accepting the cup of coffee she held out to me. The hot liquid went down my throat like a caress, and I realized it had been months since I had truly enjoyed a cup of coffee without rushing, without the pressure of having to get up and make breakfast for people who didn't even say good morning. Lydia sat down in front of me with her own cup, and for a few minutes we drank in comfortable silence. Outside, birds sang in the garden she tended with such care, and sunlight filtered through the curtains, creating golden patterns on the wooden table. "Margarita," she said at last, "I need to tell you something important, something that might change your perspective on your current situation." Her serious tone put me on alert. I put my cup down on the table and looked at her carefully. "What is it, Lydia?" "Do you remember your sister, Rachel?" The name hit me like a lightning bolt. Rachel, my younger sister, with whom I had lost contact more than 15 years ago after a family fight over our parents' inheritance, a silly argument that had grown huge because of both our pride and had ended in years of silence that neither of us had the courage to break. "Of course I remember her. Why do you ask?" Lydia took a deep breath, as if she were about to announce something that would change everything. "Because she died 6 months ago, Margarita, and she left you something in her will." The world stopped. My cup trembled in my hands, and Lydia had to take it before I dropped it. Rachel had died, and I hadn't even known. My little sister, with whom I had shared a room as a child, with whom I had laughed and fought and dreamed, had left this world without me being able to say goodbye, without us being able to fix things between us. How do you know?" I managed to ask, through the tears that began to fall without permission. "Because I was the one who took care of her during her last months. We worked together at a sewing consultancy after we retired from the factory. She got cancer, very fast, very aggressive. She looked for your number many times. She wanted to call you, but her pride—" Lydia paused, her own eyes shining with unshed tears. "Pride can be a terrible prison, can't it?" I broke down completely. I cried for my dead sister, for the lost years, for the unspoken words, for all the opportunities for reconciliation we had let pass. I cried until I felt my soul had been emptied of all the accumulated pain. Lydia hugged me the way only women who have lived a lot know how to hug, with that perfect mix of firmness and tenderness that can hold a person who is falling apart. "There's more," she whispered when my sobs calmed. "Rachel had a house, a beautiful 2-story house downtown that she bought with the savings from a lifetime of hard work. And she left it to you, Margarita. Paid off completely, no debts." The words floated in the air like soap bubbles I couldn't catch with my mind. A house. Rachel had left me a house after 15 years of not speaking. "There's also money," Lydia continued, pulling a thick manila envelope from one of the kitchen drawers. $47,000 in a savings account and a letter she wrote for you before she died. With trembling hands, I took the envelope. My name was written in Rachel's familiar handwriting, that round, careful script I had admired since I was a child. Inside were legal documents, bank statements, and a 3-page handwritten letter. "My dear sister Margarita," the letter began, and her voice seemed to whisper in my ear as I read, "If you're reading this, It means I'm no longer here to tell you in person what I should have told you years ago. I'm sorry. I'm deeply sorry that we wasted so much time fighting over things that now seem so small. My tears fell on the paper, smudging some words, but I kept reading. Rachel had known about my situation with Isaiah and Vanessa. She had asked about me, discreetly investigated how I was living, and had felt pain knowing that I was being mistreated in my own home. I wanted to call you 1,000 times, the letter said, but my stupid pride stopped me. Now that I know I'm going to die, I realize that pride is worth nothing compared to a sister's love. I'm leaving you my house and my savings because I know you'll need them to start over, because I know you are strong and brave, even when you don't feel that way. The letter continued with memories of our childhood, apologies for hurtful words said in moments of anger, and expressions of love that should have been said in life. It ended with a line that broke my heart. I hope you use this second chance to be truly happy. I love you, sister. I always did. Lydia watched me as I read, her eyes filled with an understanding that only comes from having witnessed the pain of others. When I finished, I carefully folded the letter and held it against my chest as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. The documents are all in order, Lydia said softly. Rachel's lawyer took care of everything. The house is ready for you to move in whenever you want. It's yours, Margarita. Completely yours. For the first time in 5 years, I felt rich. Not just because of the money or the property, but because of something deeper. The feeling of having options, of having power over my own life, of not depending on the poisoned charity of people who despised me. My phone, which had been silent all morning, began to vibrate insistently. It was Isaiah again. This time I decided to answer, but not with the shaky, pleading voice of the desperate woman who had run away the day before. I answered with the firm voice of a woman who had just remembered her worth. Hello, Isaiah. Mom, thank God you answered. Listen, I've been thinking all night. Vanessa and I talked, and we're willing to make some changes. We can give you more space, more freedom. Just please come back home. Pablo hasn't stopped asking for you. His voice sounded desperate, and something in his tone made me suspect there was more behind this conciliatory call. Maybe they had tried to manage the house without my help and realized how much work I did. Maybe Pablo had thrown a fit, or maybe they had simply calculated that they needed my pension to make ends meet. Isaiah, I said with a calm that surprised even me, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. How long had you been planning to send me to a nursing home? The silence on the other end was so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, his voice came back, small and guilty. Mom, it wasn't planned. We had just explored options for the future, for when you were older and needed more care. Options like what? Well, there are some very good places with activities for seniors with medical care. How much do those places cost, Isaiah? Another pause. Between $1,200 and $800 a month, depending on the level of care. I did a quick mental calculation. My pension was $450. Even if I sold my house, the money wouldn't have lasted more than 5 or 6 years in a decent place. After that, I would have been at the mercy of the public system in one of those horrible homes that show up on the news for neglect and abuse. I see, I replied, and I suppose my house would have helped to finance that stay. Mom, don't think like that. We just wanted to make sure you had the best possible care when I became too inconvenient to pretend you love me. I finished the sentence for him. I hung up and placed the phone on the table. Lydia watched me with a mix of pride and concern. Are you feeling okay? She asked. I smiled, and my smile felt genuine for the first time in years. I feel perfectly fine. In fact, I feel powerful. 3 days later, I was standing in front of the house that was now mine, the keys trembling in my hand like leaves in the wind. It was a 2-story building with terracotta brick walls and large windows that let natural light pour into every corner. The front yard was a little overgrown, but I could see the potential beneath the weeds. Rose bushes that needed pruning, a small stone path that led to the front door, and a lemon tree that promised sweet fruit in the coming seasons. Lydia was with me, holding a box with my few personal belongings that we had rescued from my suitcase. For these 3 days, she had been my rock, my guide through the legal paperwork and the mountain of forms that had to be signed to make the property transfer official. "It's beautiful, Margarita," Lydia said as we looked at the facade. Rachel had very good taste. I nodded, unable to speak. Emotion had my throat closed in a knot. This house represented more than a roof over my head. It represented independence, dignity, the possibility of living my last years as a queen in my own castle instead of as a grateful beggar in someone else's house. I opened the front door, and the smell that greeted me was like a hug from the past. It smelled clean, of well-kept wood, and underneath it all, of that soft lavender perfume that Rachel had used since she was a teenager. It was as if my sister was there welcoming me home. The living room was spacious, with wooden floors that shone even in the dim light filtering through the closed curtains. The furniture was covered with white sheets, like ghosts waiting to be awakened. As I pulled one of the sheets off, it revealed a wine-colored velvet sofa that looked comfortable and inviting. "Look at this," Lydia whispered from the kitchen. "Margarita, come see this." I followed her to the back of the house and gasped. The kitchen was twice the size of the one at Isaiah's house, with light wood cabinets, a central island perfect for preparing elaborate meals, and a window that looked out onto a backyard with a garden that seemed to have come straight out of a fairy tale. But what really made me cry was what we found on the kitchen table. A bottle of wine with a note attached that read, "To celebrate your new life, with eternal love, Rachel." Even in death, my sister had thought of every detail to make me feel welcome in my new home. My phone rang as we explored the second floor. It was Isaiah for the 5th time since morning. This time, his tone had changed dramatically. "Mom, we need to talk. Vanessa went to the bank to ask about the joint account, and they told her you had withdrawn your pension. What's going on?" I smiled as I ran my hand over the wooden railing of the staircase that led to the second floor. I had decided to move my pension to a brand new account at a different bank where only I had access. It was my money, after all, even though for 5 years they had treated it as a communal fund for household expenses. "What's going on, Isaiah, is that I'm finally taking control of my own life." "But Mom, we depend on that pension for the household expenses. Without it, we can't pay the utilities, the food." "Oh, really?" I feigned surprise. "But Vanessa told me I was a burden, a useless old woman who didn't contribute anything. If that's true, then my absence shouldn't affect your finances at all, right?" The silence on the other end confirmed what I already knew. They had been living off my money while making me feel as if they were doing me a charity by giving me a roof and food. "Mom, please, be reasonable. Pablo misses you so much. He asks for you every day." Mentioning Pablo was like a stab directly to the heart. My grandson was the only part of that house I truly missed, the only one who had shown me genuine, unconditional love. "Pablo asks for me, or are you just telling me that to manipulate me emotionally?" "It's not manipulation, Mom, it's the truth. Yesterday he asked me if you had died because you weren't answering his calls." That information hurt me deeply. I hadn't answered Pablo's calls because I knew that if I heard his small voice begging me to come back, my resolve would crumble like a sandcastle in the rain. "Isaiah, I want to see Pablo, but not at that house, and not with you and Vanessa present. I want to spend time with my grandson without you monitoring every word I say." "That's irrational, Mom. We're his parents. And what am I? A dangerous stranger? For 5 years, I took care of that child while you went out to have fun. I prepared his meals, helped him with his homework, and comforted him when he had nightmares. Now it turns out I can't spend time with him alone?" "It's not that. It's just that you're afraid of what I might tell him, aren't you? You're afraid Pablo will find out how you treated me, the things Vanessa said to me, how you humiliated me in my own house." I hung up before he could answer. Lydia, who had been pretending not to listen while examining a beautiful wooden desk in what seemed to have been Rachel's study, came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" "I'm furious," I admitted, "but I'm also determined. Isaiah and Vanessa are going to learn that they can't treat me like trash and then expect me to come running back when they need me." That afternoon, as we organized my things in my new room, a spacious suite with a private bathroom and a balcony overlooking the garden, I received an unexpected call. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Miller, this is Antonio Ruiz from Ruiz and Associates Law Firm. I was your sister Rachel's lawyer." "Oh, yes, of course. How can I help you?" "Mrs. Miller, there's something else you need to know about your sister's inheritance, something I preferred to handle after you were settled in the house." My heart rate sped up. Was there a legal problem? Some hidden debt that could take away everything I had just gained? What kind of something? "Your sister had a life insurance policy that was not included in the initial will because it required additional paperwork. A policy in the amount of $80,000. Mrs. Miller, you are the sole beneficiary." I had to sit on the bed because my legs turned to jelly. $80,000. Added to the $47,000 I already had, that made me a woman with more than $100,000 in the bank. It was more money than I had ever seen together in my entire life. Are you sure?" "Completely sure. I just need you to come to the office tomorrow to sign a few documents and the money will be transferred to your account within 24 hours. After hanging up, I sat in silence for several minutes, processing this new reality. Not only did I have a beautiful house and enough money to live comfortably, but I had the financial freedom to make decisions that were previously impossible. Lydia came in with a cup of tea and sat beside me on the bed. "From the look on your face, I'd say you got some good news." I told her about the insurance policy, and her eyes widened. "Margarita, do you realize what this means? It means you can live however you want, wherever you want, for the rest of your life. It means you never have to endure mistreatment again because of financial dependence." She was right. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely independent. I didn't need alimony from a husband who had abandoned me. I didn't need the poisoned charity of a son who despised me. I didn't need anyone's permission for anything. That night, as I lay in my own bed, in my own house, with my own rules, I thought about Vanessa and her spit. I thought about Isaiah and his complicit silence. I thought about all the times I had felt small, invisible, useless. But most of all, I thought about what I was going to do next. Because a woman with a paid-off house and over $100,000 in the bank has options that a desperate, dependent woman never has. And I had plans for those options. A week after moving into my new house, I decided it was time to confront Isaiah and Vanessa on my own terms. For those 7 days, I had ignored their desperate calls and text messages that oscillated between pleading and threatening, and I had used that time to carefully plan my next move. On Friday morning, I dressed with special care. I chose a coral-colored suit I had bought the day before at a downtown boutique, a pair of black leather shoes that made me feel powerful as I walked, and the gold earrings I had inherited from my mother. I put on a little makeup, styled my hair in an elegant bun, and looked at myself in the mirror until I saw the woman I had always been on the inside, dignified, strong, deserving of respect. I called a cab and gave the driver the address I knew by heart, but which now felt like foreign territory. During the ride, I mentally rehearsed what I was going to say, how I would handle their reactions, what cards I would play, and at what exact moment. The taxi stopped in front of my old house, and for a moment I felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with pain. It had only been 8 days since I had walked out dragging a suitcase, but it felt like an eternity. The house looked exactly the same, but I was a completely different person. I rang the doorbell firmly. I heard hurried footsteps on the other side, and when the door opened, Vanessa's face of surprise was so comical it almost made me laugh. Her eyes scanned my outfit from head to toe, clearly shocked by my transformation. "Margarita," she stammered, What a surprise! You look different." "Hello, Vanessa. I've come to talk to Isaiah and you. Is he home? She nodded, still processing my new appearance. Yes, he's in the living room. Come in. I stepped into the house that had been my home for 5 years and immediately noticed the changes. The living room was a mess. There were dirty dishes on the coffee table, and it smelled faintly of burnt food. Clearly, my absence had had a bigger impact than they had anticipated. Isaiah appeared from the kitchen with an expression that mixed relief and nervousness. Mom, thank God you came. We've been so worried about you. Where have you been staying? I've been staying at my house, I replied calmly, taking a seat on the sofa I had never dared to use without permission. Your house? Vanessa frowned. What house? Did you rent something? With what money? I smiled, savoring the moment. With the money my sister Rachel left me when she died 6 months ago, along with a beautiful house downtown and a very generous bank account. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Isaiah slumped onto the sofa as if someone had taken all the air out of his lungs. Vanessa stood with her mouth slightly open, processing the implications of what she had just heard. Your sister died? Isaiah finally found his voice. Why didn't we know? Because for 15 years we had no contact because of a silly fight over our parents' inheritance. A fight that now seems ridiculous compared to the way you've treated me. My voice remained firm, without a trace of the vulnerability I had shown for years. How much money? Vanessa got straight to the point, as was typical of her. Enough to never again need anyone's poisoned charity, I replied. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life without having to endure being spit on. Vanessa's face turned red. That was a moment of stress. I didn't mean to... Didn't mean to what? I interrupted her. Didn't mean to humiliate me in front of my grandson? Didn't mean to make me feel like a beggar in my own house? Didn't mean to call me a useless old coot who would soon be in a home? Isaiah leaned forward with his hands clasped as if he were praying. Mom, can we talk about this? Can we fix things? Vanessa will apologize, right, honey? Vanessa looked at him as if he had asked her to jump off a building, but she finally mumbled something that could have passed for an apology if one squinted and used a lot of imagination. I didn't come here for apologies, I said clearly. I came to inform you about some changes that are going to happen. I took a folder out of my purse that I had carefully prepared with the help of the lawyer, Antonio Ruiz. First, this house, as you know, is in my name, paid for completely by my work at the factory for 20 years. Mom, we know it's your house, but we've lived here. We've made improvements. What improvements, Isaiah? I looked him straight in the eyes. The hole in the bathroom wall that you've been promising to fix for 2 years? The leaky shower? The loose floorboards that almost made me fall 3 times? He blushed, clearly remembering all the times he had promised to make repairs and never did. The point is, I continued, that I am going to sell this house. I've already contacted a real estate agent, and they're coming to do an appraisal next week. Vanessa jumped off the sofa as if she had been pricked with a pin. You can't sell the house on us. We live here. Pablo goes to school near here. I can, and I am going to sell my house, I replied with a calm that surprised me. You have 30 days to find another place to live. That's what the law states when the owner decides to sell a property occupied by family members. Isaiah looked like he was about to vomit. Mom, you can't do this. We're your family. My family? I stood up from the sofa, feeling every inch of my height. My family wouldn't have spit in my food. My family wouldn't have treated me like a maid. My family wouldn't have planned to send me to a home to take my things. We never planned that, Vanessa protested, but her voice sounded hollow, even to her own ears. I took out my phone and played a recording I had made during one of Isaiah's calls. His own voice filled the room. There are some very good places with activities for seniors, between $1,200 and $800 a month. Their faces turned white as paper. They hadn't expected me to have evidence of their plans. Second point, I continued, consulting my notes. Pablo, I want to establish a formal visitation schedule. On alternating weekends, he comes to stay with me at my house without supervision from you, under no circumstances." "No way," Vanessa screamed. "You're not going to fill my son's head with poison against us." "Poison?" I laughed coldly. "Like the poison you injected when you forced him to watch you spit in my food? That kind of poison?" "Mom," Isaiah tried to mediate. "Maybe we can reach an agreement. Maybe not," I interrupted him. "These are my conditions. They are not negotiable. You have 30 days to vacate my house, and we will establish visits with Pablo through my lawyer if necessary." "Your lawyer?" Vanessa practically spit the words. "Now you have a lawyer?" "I have many things I didn't have a week ago," I replied, putting the papers back in my purse, "including self-respect." I headed toward the door, feeling their eyes on my back like daggers. Before leaving, I turned around one last time. "Oh, and one more thing. Pablo deserves to know the truth about what happened here. He deserves to understand that a real family doesn't treat their loved ones that way. When he's ready, when he's older, I'll tell him the whole story, not to turn him against you, but to teach him how not to treat the people he loves." I walked out of that house with my head held high and my heart pounding from a mix of triumph and sadness. Triumph because I had finally reclaimed my power. Sadness because I had had to go so far for my own son to respect me. The taxi was waiting outside, and as we drove away, I didn't look back. There was nothing in that house worth remembering with nostalgia. Everything good in my life was now ahead, waiting for me in my new home. 2 weeks after my confrontation with Isaiah and Vanessa, my new life had settled into a rhythm I hadn't experienced in decades. I woke up when my body felt rested, not when Pablo's crying or Vanessa's complaints pulled me from sleep. I had breakfast on my back terrace, surrounded by the garden I was slowly restoring, watching the flowers Rachel had planted come back to life under my care. But the most beautiful thing of all was the silence. Not the tense silence of walking on eggshells, but the peaceful silence of a woman who was finally at peace with herself. That Tuesday morning, as I watered the roses that had begun to bloom again, I heard someone knocking on my door. Through the window I saw a small, familiar figure that made my heart race. Pablo. I ran to the door, and when I opened it, my grandson launched into my arms with that desperate strength of children who have missed someone deeply. Behind him, at a safe distance, was Isaiah, with an expression that mixed shame and defeat. "Grandma Margarita." Pablo buried his face in my neck, and I could feel his wet tears on my skin. "I missed you so much. I thought you had died because you weren't answering my calls." My heart broke and mended at the same time. I hugged my grandson as if he were the most precious thing in the world, because he truly was. "Oh, my love, I didn't die. I was just reorganizing my life. But listen to me carefully. I could never die without saying goodbye to you first." Pablo pulled back to look at me, his big eyes still bright with tears. "Dad says you live in a new house now. Is that true?" "Yes, my love. Would you like to see it? It's very pretty, and it has a garden where we could plant whatever you want." His eyes lit up as if I had mentioned Disneyland. "Really? I could plant tomatoes? I love tomatoes." I laughed, that genuine laugh that hadn't come from me in years. "We could plant all the tomatoes you want, and flowers too, and maybe a little herb garden for cooking." Isaiah approached timidly, clearly uncomfortable but determined to speak. "Mom, could we talk for a moment alone?" I looked at Pablo and stroked his hair. "My love, why don't you explore the backyard while I talk to your dad? But be careful with the roses. Some of them still have thorns." Pablo nodded excitedly and ran toward the backyard as if he had found his own personal amusement park. Isaiah and I stayed in the living room. The air between us was thick with unspoken words and wounds that were still bleeding. "Mom," he began, and his voice sounded like a small child who knows he has done something terrible. "I've come to truly apologize, not out of convenience, not because I need something from you, but because I've realized how horrible we've been to you." I sat on my new sofa, the one I had chosen myself without having to ask anyone's permission. and studied him carefully. There was something different about him, something I hadn't seen in years, genuine humility. "Go on," I said simply. "When you left, we were mad at first. Vanessa said you were being dramatic, that you'd come back in a few days asking for apologies. But after a week—" He ran his hands through his hair, that nervous gesture he'd made since he was a boy. "Mom, we didn't know how much you did around that house. We didn't know how much we needed you." "What happened after I left?" I asked, even though I had a pretty good idea. "Everything fell apart," he admitted in a broken voice. "The house became a mess. Vanessa and I couldn't stop fighting because neither of us knew how to handle everything you did. Pablo was constantly asking for you, and every time he mentioned your name, Vanessa would get hysterical." He paused, taking a deep breath, as if gathering courage for what came next. "And then there's the money. Mom, without your pension, we can't pay the basic expenses. We tried to get full-time jobs, but with Pablo and everything—" His voice trailed off. "And Vanessa, she also realized her mistakes." Isaiah lowered his gaze. Vanessa left." The words fell between us like stones in still water. "She left? What do you mean she left?" "She took Pablo 3 days ago and went to her mother's house. She says she can't live in a house that's going to be sold, that she can't live with the uncertainty of not knowing if we'll have money to eat next month." His voice broke completely. "She says if I want to get my family back, I have to choose between her and you." For a moment, I felt a fierce satisfaction. Vanessa had shown her true colors when things got tough, when she could no longer live comfortably at my expense. She had run away like the rat she had always been. But then I saw the pain in my son's eyes, and I remembered that despite everything, he was still the baby I had carried in my arms, the child I had raised alone after his father left us. "And what are you going to do?" I asked softly. "I don't know," he whispered. "Mom, I've been a terrible son. I allowed my wife to mistreat you in your own house. I planned to send you to a home to please her. I chose her comfort over your dignity again and again." Tears began to run down his cheeks. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Not for me, but for Pablo. He loves you, Mom. He talks about you all the time." I approached him, and after so many years, I saw the scared little boy who hid behind my skirts during storms again. I put a hand on his shoulder, feeling him crumble under my touch. "Isaiah," I said softly, "I forgive you, but forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and it definitely doesn't mean things can go back to how they were." He looked up, hope and fear dancing in his eyes. "What does it mean then?" "It means we start over, but with clear rules. It means that if you want to have a relationship with me, it will be based on mutual respect, not on financial convenience. It means Pablo can spend time with me whenever he wants, without interference from Vanessa or you. And the house? The house is still for sale. That decision doesn't change, but—" I paused, an idea forming in my mind. "There's something we could do, something that could benefit us all." His eyes lit up with curiosity and hope. "This house has 4 bedrooms. It's too big for me alone. If you've really changed, if you're truly willing to treat me with the respect I deserve, you could move in here, you and Pablo, not Vanessa." "Seriously?" His voice was barely a whisper. "But with very clear conditions," I continued firmly. "You pay rent, not a lot, but something to remind you that this is my house, not a favor I'm doing for you. You help with the chores, you respect my rules and my space, and if you ever disrespect me again or allow anyone else to do it, you leave immediately." Isaiah nodded so vigorously I thought he was going to hurt his neck. "Yes, Mom, yes to everything, I promise." At that moment, Pablo appeared at the patio door with dirt on his hands and a smile that lit up his whole face. "Grandma, your garden is incredible. We can really plant tomatoes together?" I looked at him. Then I looked at my son, who was crying tears of gratitude on my sofa, and I made a decision that would change everything again. "Yes, my love. I said to Pablo. We're going to plant a lot of tomatoes. And maybe, if your dad behaves very well, he can stay and help us. 6 months after that cursed Sunday when Vanessa spit on my plate, I was sitting on my terrace, watching Pablo carefully water the tomatoes we had planted together. His small hands held the watering can with the seriousness of a surgeon, focused on giving each plant exactly the amount of water it needed. "Grandma Margarita," he said, without looking up from his work, "do you think the tomatoes will be ready for my birthday?" I smiled, calculating mentally. His birthday was in 2 weeks, and the tomatoes already showed small green fruits that promised to become a bountiful harvest. "I think so, my love, and when they're ready, we'll make the most delicious tomato sauce in the world." Pablo jumped with excitement, staining his shirt with wet dirt. In these 6 months, he had grown so much that sometimes I had a hard time recognizing the timid, frightened child who had witnessed that humiliation. Now he was more confident, happier, freer to simply be a boy. Isaiah appeared at the kitchen door, wiping his hands with a rag. In these months, he had changed as much as Pablo, but in different ways. He had lost a little weight from the physical work he now did as a supervisor at a construction site, a job he had gotten after realizing he needed to support himself and his son without depending on anyone else. "How are the farmers doing?" he asked, approaching us with a genuine smile I hadn't seen on his face in years. "Dad, look how big the tomatoes are!" Pablo ran to him, taking his hand to drag him toward the plants. "Grandma says they'll be red by my birthday." Isaiah knelt down to examine the plants with the seriousness that Pablo's most important project deserved. "Wow, they're incredible! They're going to be the tastiest tomatoes in the whole city." I watched this interaction between father and son with a mix of joy and melancholy. Joy because Pablo finally had his father's complete attention and unconditional love. Melancholy because I wondered what things would have been like if Isaiah had been like this from the beginning, before Vanessa turned him into a lesser version of himself. Vanessa had tried to come back twice in these 6 months. The first time she arrived with tears and apologies, promising that she had changed, that she had understood her mistakes. Isaiah listened politely and then told her that he had made his decision. His son and his mother were more important than his marriage. Vanessa left furious, yelling threats about taking Pablo and never letting us see him again. The second time, she came with a lawyer, trying to claim rights to the house she had lived in for 5 years. The meeting lasted exactly 10 minutes, the time it took for my lawyer, Antonio Ruiz, to explain that she had no legal right to a property that had never been in her name and for which she had never paid a single cent. Since then, she had remained silent, although we knew from mutual friends that she had definitively moved in with her mother and was telling everyone that we had unfairly thrown her out on the street. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Lydia, who called every Tuesday for our ritual of catching up on neighborhood news and planning our activities for the week. "How's my favorite businesswoman?" she asked with that warmth that had made our friendship flourish even more in these months. I laughed. Businesswoman was the joke that had started 3 months ago when I decided to use some of Rachel's money for something I had been passionate about my whole life: sewing. I had bought 3 professional sewing machines and turned one of the rooms in the house into a small workshop where I did alterations for the women in the neighborhood. What had started as a hobby to keep myself busy had become a prosperous little business. The ladies came not only because I did good work, but because my house had become a refuge where women could talk freely about their problems while I fixed their dresses and their lives with the same patience. "I have a new client for you," Lydia continued. "Her name is Vanessa. Can you believe it? A young woman going through a very similar situation to yours. Her mother-in-law treats her terribly. She lives in her husband's family's house and feels like a stranger in her own life." The name made me laugh with irony. What a coincidence with the name. Of course, tell her to come by tomorrow afternoon. Pablo will be at school and Isaiah at work, so we can talk quietly. After hanging up, I thought about how life comes full circle. 6 months ago, I was the desperate woman who needed help, and now I was the woman who helped others in similar situations. It wasn't just the money that had changed my life, but the recovery of my own dignity and the understanding that I deserved respect. That evening, as I prepared dinner in my kitchen, where I could cook whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, without having to ask permission or endure disparaging comments, I reflected on everything that had happened. Vanessa's spit on my plate had been the most humiliating moment of my life, but it had also been my liberation, because sometimes we need to hit rock bottom to realize that we deserve so much more than we're getting. Pablo ran in from the garden with cheeks flushed from exercise and a smile that could light up a whole city. "Grandma, guess what? I told my teacher about our tomatoes, and she says when they're ready, I can bring some in to share with the class." "That's a wonderful idea," I replied, hugging him and feeling how his pure, unconditional love filled all the empty spaces that years of mistreatment had left in my heart. Isaiah appeared at the kitchen door in his dirty work uniform, but with an expression of satisfaction I had learned to recognize. It was the face of a man who had honestly earned his day's pay, who could look his son in the eyes knowing he had done the right thing. "How was your day, Mom?" he asked. And the question was genuine, not an empty formality as it had been for years. "It was perfect," I replied. And it was true. Mine, too. The supervisor congratulated me on the work on the new school project. He says he's going to recommend me for a promotion. I saw the pride in his eyes, the pride of a man who had learned to value himself for his own merits instead of living at the expense of others. He was the son I had always hoped he would be, the father Pablo deserved to have. That night, after Pablo fell asleep and Isaiah retired to his room to study for the promotion exam that was coming up, I sat on my terrace with a cup of tea and looked at the stars. I thought about Rachel, about how her last act of love had been to give me the freedom I needed to discover who I really was when no one was humiliating me. I thought about all the women who came to my sewing workshop, looking not just for me to fix their clothes, but for me to help them mend the broken pieces of their self-esteem. I thought about Vanessa, wondering if she would ever realize that the power she had wielded over me was false, built on my own insecurity and my fear of being alone. I wondered if she would ever understand that true respect cannot be demanded. It can only be earned. But most of all, I thought about me, the 67-year-old woman who had discovered that it is never too late to start over, to reclaim your dignity, to build the life you deserve to have. Vanessa's spit had been her undoing, not mine, because it had woken me from a sleep of resignation and reminded me that I am Margarita, a strong, hard-working woman worthy of love and respect, a woman who doesn't need anyone's approval to know her own value, and that woman was finally home. Did you like my story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.